Your ancestors had more free time than you do. Not a little more, dramatically more.
The average hunter-gatherer worked somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a day.
The rest was theirs. Nobody scheduled it.
Nobody optimized it. Nobody sent a follow-up email asking where they were with it.
It just existed, open and unstructured, stretching out in every direction with no agenda attached. So, the question isn't how they survived?
We know how they survived. The question is what they did with the rest of it. And the answer, it turns out, is one of the stranger and more quietly devastating things you'll learn about being human. Because here's what nobody tells you.
We talk about ancient humans almost entirely in terms of survival.
The hunting, the foraging, the fire-making, the tool-chipping. We reconstruct their diets and their shelters, and their migration routes and their burial rituals. And then we stop. As if the moment the immediate survival task was completed, our ancestors simply powered down and waited for the next one.
As if prehistoric life was nothing but a series of urgent tasks with no texture in between.
It wasn't, not even close. And the evidence for what actually filled those hours is stranger, more human, and considerably more uncomfortable than most people expect.
Uncomfortable, because when you look at what ancient humans did with their time, you realize how much of it we've quietly discarded.
And how little of what replaced it was actually an improvement.
Let's start with the basic math, because the math alone is genuinely jarring.
Modern anthropological studies of existing hunter-gatherer societies, the ones we can actually observe and measure, consistently find the same thing. The Nakungsan people of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Piraha of the Amazon, across radically different environments, different cultures, different continents, different diets, different social structures, the number keeps coming up the same. 3 to 5 hours of what we'd call productive work per day. Sometimes less. Richard Lee's landmark study of the Kung found that adults spent roughly 2.5 days per week obtaining food. Not 2.5 hours per day. 2.5 days per week. The rest was something else entirely. Now, before you picture a life of pure prehistoric leisure, understand what those working hours actually look like.
They're genuinely demanding, physically brutal in ways that no gym will ever replicate.
Cognitively intense in ways that require a kind of full-body attention that most modern work simply doesn't. High stakes in the most literal possible sense.
But the point stands. By any modern measure, the workday was short. Dramatically, almost insultingly short.
And what came after it was where the actual texture of human life lived. The first thing ancient humans did with their time, and the thing that archaeology and anthropology both point to with remarkable consistency, is talk.
Just talk. Sit together and talk. This sounds almost embarrassingly simple until you realize that language itself, the entire cognitive system of symbolic communication that separates us from every other species on the planet, probably evolved at least partly because our ancestors had unhurried time to use it.
Not to coordinate hunts, not to warn each other about predators, though both of those things happened.
What drove language to the extraordinary level of nuance and abstraction it reached was almost certainly the hours spent doing nothing urgent at all.
Just sitting around fires in the dark, talking. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar has argued that early human language evolved as a form of social grooming scaled up for larger groups. Chimpanzees maintain social bonds by physically grooming each other, sitting together and picking through fur for hours at a time.
It's slow and time-consuming, but critically important. It's how they manage relationships, build alliances, settle tensions.
Humans, living in groups too large for everyone to physically groom everyone else, developed language as a way to maintain those bonds at scale. You could talk to 3 people simultaneously.
You could maintain a relationship with someone across the group without physical contact.
Language, in this reading, didn't start as a survival tool. It started as a bonding technology. And bonding required time. Unstructured, unhurried time, sitting together, talking about nothing in particular. Which is, if you're honest about it, still what most genuinely good conversation actually is. The second thing is the one that surprises people most. They played, not children, adults. Hunter-gatherer societies documented across the last century show a striking consistency in the presence of adult play across radically different cultures. Games, physical contests, music, storytelling, humor, dance. The Hadza spend hours every evening singing and dancing around fires. Not ceremonially, just because it felt good and brought people together.
But alongside the formal ritual, alongside the ceremony, there's just play.
Games of skill and chance.
Physical contests between adults that have no survival stakes. And humor. A genuinely significant portion of campfire hours across almost every hunter-gatherer society ever studied in depth involves people making each other laugh.
Joke-telling, teasing, storytelling with deliberate comic structure. Humor in these societies isn't entertainment in the modern passive sense, where you sit and receive it from a screen.
It's a social instrument. It regulates status. It releases tension. It reinforces bonds. It signals intelligence and creativity in ways that matter for how you're perceived in the group.
Your ancestors weren't just surviving. They were performing, competing, laughing, being laughed at, winning social points through wit, losing them through a joke that didn't land.
They were social in the way that humans are actually built to be social, which is to say, relentlessly, noisily, and with a level of interpersonal intensity that most modern life actively protects us from.
The third category is one that we have actual physical evidence for, which makes it both more certain and more striking. They made things. Not tools, not weapons, not objects with any documentable survival function. Decorative objects. Personal ornaments. Things that existed purely because someone wanted to make them. The Blombos Cave in South Africa has yielded pieces of ochre, engraved with abstract geometric patterns dating to 75,000 years ago. Shell beads, deliberately pierced for wearing, and found at multiple sites across Africa, date back over 100,000 years. Personal ornaments that required sustained attention, fine motor control, patience, and a quality of focused aesthetic decision-making that only happens when you are not in immediate survival mode.
Someone sat down, not in a hurry, and made something beautiful for no documentable reason except that they wanted to.
And then, presumably, wore it. Showed it to people. Felt something about how it looked. That impulse, the one that has you rearranging your apartment at 11 at night for no reason, or spending 3 hours on something that no one will ever see, or caring deeply about the aesthetic of something that serves no function, is not a modern neurosis.
It is at least 100,000 years old, possibly considerably older.
The desire to make something beautiful is not a luxury that civilization added on top of survival. It appears to be built into us at a level that precedes civilization by a very long way. The fourth thing is perhaps the most radical, given where we are now. They rested, actually rested, not sleep, though they did that too. And the evidence from modern hunter-gatherer studies suggests they slept more flexibly and more restoratively than we do, often in 2 phases across the night, with a natural waking period in between.
But rest during the waking hours. Sitting still. Watching the fire. Lying in the shade through the heat of the afternoon.
Doing nothing that could be measured or justified or pointed to.
The physiological data from contemporary hunter-gatherer populations shows consistently lower levels of chronic cortisol than modern populations. Lower chronic stress. Not because their lives were safe, they weren't.
But because the threats they faced were acute rather than chronic. A predator attack is terrifying and real, and then it ends.
Your nervous system was not designed to stay at low-level alert for months at a time. It was designed for intense bursts of acute stress followed by genuine recovery.
Recovery that looked, from the outside, exactly like doing nothing. Underneath all of this, threading through the talking and the playing and the making and the resting, is something that's almost impossible to quantify, but that almost every researcher who has spent real time with hunter-gatherer communities eventually comments on. A quality of presence, an orientation toward the immediate moment that modern humans have almost entirely lost.
And spend considerable money trying to recover through meditation apps and wellness retreats.
When there is no future to optimize, no calendar to maintain, no long-term project to track, the present becomes extraordinarily vivid. The Hadza have been described by multiple researchers as remarkably, almost strikingly present in a way that feels unusual to outside observers. Not because they've achieved some elevated meditative state, but because the structure of their days actually supports it structurally. There is no mental elsewhere to be.
There is the fire, the people, the particular quality of this specific evening.
Attention, undivided and unscheduled, resting on what is actually in front of you. That is not a spiritual achievement. That was just Tuesday. Now here's where it lands on you, because it always does. You are not a modern creature who occasionally has ancient instincts. You are a deeply ancient creature, running an entirely modern life on hardware that was built for something else. The restlessness when you're not productive isn't a character flaw. It's a brain that evolved to handle acute stress, looking for the signal it's calibrated for, and finding instead a chronic low-level pressure it was never designed for. The compulsive reach for your phone the moment you're alone and unstimulated isn't weakness.
It's a profoundly social brain that evolved inside a group of 20 to 50 people. It knew completely, reaching for the closest available substitute for that connection. The guilt around doing nothing, around rest that produces nothing measurable, is entirely invented.
It has no biological precedent. For the overwhelming majority of human existence, rest was not laziness. It was part of the design. Your body still knows this. Your culture has spent roughly 200 years trying to convince you otherwise. The uncomfortable truth at the center of all of this is not that ancient humans had better lives.
They didn't, in many measurable ways. The infant mortality rate alone would close that conversation permanently. But they had something we have not successfully replaced.
They had unstructured time that was socially legitimized. Time that nobody was trying to monetize, optimize, or fill. Time that existed not to produce an outcome, but to be used however the human animal actually needed to use it.
For talking, for playing, for making things nobody asked for sitting still, for laughing at something that didn't need to be captured or shared or turned into anything.
For being without the continuous low-level performance of being. And the evidence, accumulating quietly across anthropology and psychology and neuroscience, is that our species does not thrive without it.
That the modern arrangement, where almost every hour is either working or recovering from working or preparing to work again, is doing something to us that we are only beginning to find language for.
Your ancestors knew how to do nothing. They did it every single day and considered it completely normal.
And they were, in ways that matter more than productivity metrics can capture, considerably better at being human than most of us are.
Maybe the question isn't what ancient humans did all day. Maybe the question is what we decided to do instead, and whether it was actually worth it.